variety of conditions that might have in the past kept somebody from participating, but now are not. And how do we make decisions about whether or not we should have those individuals participate? I'm Mandy Elder. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health Sciences and the program director for the Master's in Athletic Training program. We're preparing students to be athletic trainers, to be able to go out into the big world and take care of athletes and physically active individuals as far as their healthcare needs. And so athletic trainers actually take care of folks from preventing injuries all the way back to return to sport and activity. We grew out of the roots of the locker room and have moved into the world of just regular people, physical activity. And so while we probably still have the majority of our folks working in the athletic department, we have a lot of people who work in industrial settings, in hospital settings, in entertainment settings. I actually was just at the Globetrotters with one of our former students who's the athletic trainer for the Globetrotters, which is a whole different ballgame for him. There's a lot of different places athletic trainers go, so while this looks like sports, because it pretty much is, please keep in mind that as we talk about athletes or physically active people, it could be you that we're talking about, and not just somebody we see in uniform. And I apologize, the computer seems to want to keep shutting down today, even though this is a live presentation, so if it goes dark, I'll turn it back up. So where we're going to go today, so just thinking about ethical participation, and talking about pre-existing conditions, talking about post-injury decision-making, healthcare models for athletic trainers and in athletics, and then weather threats. And all of these pose complex participation decisions for those of us who are engaging in some type of activity. But before we get going, I want to talk a little bit about who the players are. Who are the players that are involved in the decisions? So for me as an athletic trainer, I am primarily involved in that decision making, but we have a whole lot of other folks who come to the table. Obviously the athlete needs to be involved for patient-centered care so that we make sure that we're serving them for their best purposes. What is their choice about what they're doing, but we need to be able to provide to them the best information possible so they can make the best decision for themselves. But then we have family. Spouses, parents. Parents can always be fun. How many of you are parents on their own? Parents of an athlete. Sometimes those get challenging, and sometimes they're super easy. I'm going to hope that all of you are the super easy parents after you leave today. Coaches are also challenging, and we'll talk a little bit about why coaches can be a complex part of this decision-making tree. Administrators, owners, managers, so as we talk about professional sports where we now have owners and managers of those teams coming into play, you'll hear me talk about the W or the dollar today. Is it about the win, or is it about the dollar at the end of the day, or is it just about the fun? And I'm a big proponent of fun. My dad was a PE teacher. I grew up in the gym. Activity was supposed to be about lifelong activity and fun. And somewhere over the course of my life, we have kind of detoured from that significantly. And so these folks start coming into play. Agents can come into play. When we have college athletes who are now trying to go pro, agents start coming into that decision-making process. And a lot of times the pressure can come in with these individuals about, well, you need to keep that hush-hush, you need to say something different, it's not really that. I probably should have put TV announcers on here who tell you the wrong thing all the time. Like, oh, that's a dislocated ankle. I'm like, no, that was a hip, but close enough. And then boosters can get involved when you get into areas where sports is a big deal and boosters are paying a lot of money. Boosters start coming into this process and maybe pressuring the decision-making process as well. And apparently we're going to last about 2 minutes. And we'll keep working. All I need is a fingerprint every once in a while. And then the media can also become one of the key players in this, especially as they're trying to hound for information about those athletes. So keep these folks in mind as we go through the conversation today. And I do want it to be a conversation. I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to get to help make some decisions today. But thinking about some of the challenges that there are when we get into healthcare in the athletic activity type of situation. So starting with pre-existing conditions. So these are conditions that somebody might be bringing to the table when they're trying to participate in sport. And I just threw a couple up here and am very open for other suggestions, comments around this. Sickle cell trait is an interesting condition. It's not really a condition, it's a genetic trait, it's a trait, it shouldn't be a condition, but it's something somebody brings to the table with them to participation. And within the last decade, this has become very noticeable in sport as we have found more athletes who have had trouble with sickle cell trait. But living in Colorado Springs, sickle cell trait creates a problem at altitude and with exertion, and we run into problems called exertional sickling, which is a potentially life-threatening condition for that athlete. So the NCAA, just over a decade ago, started to mandate that athletes have sickle cell trait testing. And that created problems because now you're invading my privacy. Cultural issues about we don't want to know. I don't want to know if I have the trait because that's just not great in my culture. But as a healthcare provider, knowing that they have that trait is helpful so that we know how to prevent that sickling event because it is a preventable event. There aren't many things that we can prevent completely, but that is one of them. We actually now have athletes, professional athletes, so when their teams come to play in Denver, they don't play that day because they know that they're at sea level and they know that they're at risk. And so they step out of the game for that day. And that says a lot for an ethical choice for an NFL athlete to say, I'm not going to play today just because of the risk to my health. Disability is another one that has been coming up over the past several decades of can I participate in sport with my disability? When my parents were kids, they're like, oh yeah, if you didn't have a kidney, you didn't play, or if you didn't have one eye, you didn't play because you were going to get hurt, or you can die if you lost your other kidney, or all these things. And now disability is becoming mainstream. And we are actually talking about disabled athletes participating with able-bodied athletes, and what is their appropriate venue. And so what's the ethical dilemma in that type of participation? And I apologize, I'm not sure why this doesn't want to read that I'm working with the computer. Size and maturity. We used to have lightweight and heavyweight football, and now we have 7th grade and 8th grade football. What does that do? What does that change? Okay. Some of you may have the kid who doesn't grow until they're 16. And some of you may have the kid who grew when he was 10 and became the monster in his class. Or in her class, it can also be a her. So what do we do with that? How do we make the appropriate decision with that athlete? And then unknown conditions. What are the conditions somebody might be bringing to the table that we don't know about? Or that they may be not disclosing to us? There is a common practice, unfortunately, in this world of sport where people come to the table or with an injury that they know they have and don't tell us. I worked at the East-West All-Star Shriners football game one year, and there were physicals day one. Well, these athletes have been playing all year. They're obviously capable. But they did physicals to find the pre-existing conditions that athletes were bringing to the table for that game to try to get the Shriners to play for that surgery rather than the school that didn't have good insurance, or they didn't have the insurance on themselves to be able to cover that surgery. So there's lots of ethical decisions that have to be made around all of these, but all of them also come down to opportunity versus risk. What is the risk for that athlete to participate safely, but what is the opportunity we want to give them to be able to participate? So, as you see here, disabled participating with able-bodied, okay? You also see some statements, some tops of some papers from the National Athletic Trainers Association, which is my professional organization, over some variety of conditions that might have in the past kept somebody from participating, but now are not. And how do we make decisions about whether or not we should have those individuals participate? So asthma, diabetes, sudden death conditions, so hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, somebody has a known heart condition that could cause death. Can any of you think of any other conditions that might be something that we want to be aware of, that we still would want to give somebody the opportunity to participate with?
Diabetes.
Diabetes, for sure.
Well, this isn't really a condition, but, and I don't know if you're going to touch
Trey,
on
can come in
this,
here.
but it's, this new awareness of the transgender people and their right, and which gender do they?
Which team do they compete
Yes,
with?
exactly,
Yes.
especially if they are on hormones that either give them an advantage or a disadvantage.
That is a significant topic amongst athletic healthcare providers because of the unknown associated with that, the fear associated with that, trying to determine where they're at in the spectrum of potentially changing genders. Are they changing genders or having an identity as opposed to changing genders? And so that creates additional comments. Jeff came and spoke to my class a couple years ago, and it turned into a very interesting conversation with our students who have no problems with female towards male. But boy, you talk about male to female, and you have a whole different story, and we can go down a whole different rabbit hole with that today. But, because male to female is unfair competition. But female to male is not unfair competition in most of the conversation. So definitely. Any other things that people would bring to the table where we might want to pose opportunity for them, even though they're bringing something that may cause healthcare challenges?
Pregnancy?
Pregnancy, for sure.
Maybe performance anxiety.
Sure. Any others?
Bipolar disorder.
That's interesting. I hadn't really put that one to a list, but definitely bipolar disorder and other mental health conditions are becoming much more significant. Over 75% of collegiate athletes are reporting mental health conditions currently, which is interesting and challenging for those of us trying to keep them happy enough to get through a rehab.
You mentioned this already, but loss of a paired organ, so missing a paired organ.
Yeah, paired organs.
Previous concussion.
Previous concussion, yes. So that non-disclosure piece. We have a lot of doctor shopping that goes on in this country. And so when we talk about pre-existing conditions and the unknown, a school might know. If that kid has 3 concussions and the school says you can't play, right now you need a doctor's release, they may skip the line and go to the next school district, which doesn't necessarily share information, and they show up with that. Same thing happens in collegiate sports, where the athletes they maybe have kept out here, but they're going over there and they just don't disclose that kind of information. So again, ethical decision making on behalf of the athlete and the parents sometimes gets really challenging, because now I don't know if that kid has a history of concussion. And so this could be their first concussion, it could be their 5th concussion. And we don't know what that's going to bring to the table. So we do have lots of challenges with that. So if we think about our principles: integrity, trust, accountability, transparency, fairness, respect, rule of law, and viability, as we're thinking about giving people opportunity with pre-existing conditions, which of those principles do you feel apply to the decisions we're making about putting people back on the court or back on the road or back on their bike?
Transparency.
Okay, how so?
Everybody should be open about what they have, what they know, so the coaches know, I'm thinking more in terms of high school, that's where kids are, but
Sure.
so that everybody's aware that it's, kid's slowing down, well, we know he's got this or that, and that might be impacting him.
Absolutely. Others?
Trust. You have to trust that the athlete's being honest with you, and the athlete has to have a level of trust in the athletic trainer.
Right. So as a healthcare provider, I have to build that level of trust for people to tell me and understand that I'm going to do my best and give them the best advice I can to make the best decision for them. And that goes back to patient-centered care, where I'm making sure that I'm involving the athlete and their family in those decisions.
I'm a slow thinker. And based on what you asked before, of what we're bringing to the table, I was thinking with the genetic testing now, you can test for whether you have, propensity for a certain particular sport. So what you're bringing to the table perhaps for that is fairness and transparency.
Yeah, for sure. Trying to be fair, trying to make it equitable, right? So fair doesn't always mean equal. Fair just means equitable. And trying to make sure everybody has an opportunity to participate, but in the safest manner possible. All right. Good conversation. So it's a little hard to see. It's a little dark, but here, they're on the same turf, and we have here. This is a college team.
College?
College, yes. The player on the left is 4'9". The player on the right was 6'4". Don't know their weights, but it's obviously different. So what are some of the challenges with this? How do I make ethical decisions about letting these athletes play? Should they play? Should they not play?
What's
It's a safety
is it
decision.
football?
It is football, yes. American football.
Hopefully he's the kicker.
Right, so.
Yeah, yeah, depends on the position.
Yeah.
He actually is not. He's a running back.
Well, he's probably really
Which is
fast.
surprising.
Yeah.
It was surprising to me that he was in that position, but he's quick. And I'm kind of thinking he can dive between all these big guys. But this does pose some challenges. But is it my place as the healthcare provider in trying to prevent injury to make a determination about whether that athlete can play?
Yeah, I was going to say, in healthcare, we often, what's not on the Daniels Fund principles is autonomy. And that's what I would consider in this, if someone knows the risks, it's their choice. It's right to self-determination, right?
Right. So again, it's advising of the risk, it's giving them the full story so that they can make their own choice.
So I have just a general question then.
Sure.
Is in your position on a college team, do you have decision-making authority, or how? I guess it probably varies from an Alabama to a St. Swithin's. Does the coach, is he the ultimate
I
decision maker?
probably would never have had a decision about whether these guys set foot on the field unless they brought to me their pre-participation exam or pre-existing injuries to ask me about their injuries and is their knee so trashed that they're not going to make it, so I'm risking money on somebody who's not going to make it here for 4 or 5 years. At the college level, this is probably not a question for me. At the high school level, this could become a question for me. And I'm not sure when it happened that we switched from playing by size to give people a little less risk to playing by age, because we all know that kids age and mature at different rates. And why age was a better deciding factor than maturity, I don't know. Jeff might know. I don't know.
I don't know when that happened.
I just recall going, when did we switch to 7th and 8th grade football instead of lightweight and heavyweight? And so it does bring in some interesting conversation, but I do know I'm going to keep a closer eye on this little fellow while he's out on the field, especially as a running back more heavily in the mix. So some of the other things that we see up here, again, position statements for us to help make good decisions about conditions that might create potential injury problems. So pediatric overuse injuries. This one is an interesting topic. Do we let our kids play till they die when they're 12 because it's Little League, or do we want them to have a career longevity? So there's rules in Little League baseball about how many times you can pitch a ball. Are we all aware of that? Somebody didn't? So the interesting thing about that is that you keep track of pitches while you're playing, and you count that. But we have places in the country where I can be on my travel baseball team, and I can also be on my school baseball team, all at the same time. Well, that coach is counting my pitches, and that coach is counting my pitches, but nobody's putting those pitches together. My nephew played travel baseball while he played catcher and pitcher, two of the players who throw the ball frequently. And then he was playing quarterback on his football team. And I'm like, dude, how much are you throwing? And he's like, oh, I'm paying attention. I'm like, no, really, how much are you throwing? Do you know how many times you're throwing a ball? Any ball. No, but it's not that much. My coaches make sure I stop. Like, which coaches are they talking? Are you keeping track? Is your dad keeping track? No. A month later, he's like, on my elbows, Jack. I know. Told you gotta count. Well, we're starting to figure out this is becoming problematic. And you now can't be on the travel team or club team while you're in a school team in some states. It's not all states. Colorado, I think that is one that we have divided. You can't be on a club and a school team at the same time. But that still doesn't mean that we don't have athletes who are playing year-round in the same sport. So they're throwing and throwing and throwing and throwing and throwing, or they're jumping and jumping and jumping and jumping and jumping, and not getting a break. We don't have that multi-dimensional presentation of sport that we used to have, where we went through 3 different seasons of 3 different sports, and in the summer we might have gone to a camp, and now we have people playing 12 months out of the year. Over Christmas, over Thanksgiving, and tournaments, and forget the holidays, and parents are running themselves ragged. But we're creating these overuse injuries, and so some of the recommendations come out to try to prevent that so kids can participate, but so we can increase longevity of their careers. To be a professional baseball player, you don't really hit 40s and still be a real successful baseball pitcher, because you start having lots of chronic elbow conditions.
So what you're talking about now, I mean, it strikes me a lot of, thinking about the principles, accountability. Because I think about, so as a kid, I did a lot of sports. Growing up in California in the 70s, we did BMX, bicycles, skateboarding, roller skating, and we would do these things all day long, like in the summer, all day long, every single day. But all of the sport activity was entirely pleasure-based because there were no adults involved. These were all sports without adults. And there's still a lot of that, because there are still plenty of kids skateboarding and whatnot. But a lot of our youth sport has become increasingly, it has been for a very long time, of course, but it's become increasingly adult-centered. And that's what, with all this stuff we're talking about here, these are kids moving from one adult-centered sport to another adult-centered sport.
Right.
And so accountability becomes really important, because you've got the adult coach, the adult parents, and other adults involved that are making decisions that the kid is not equipped to make those decisions themselves. And so that just seems like such a fundamental part of what you're talking about here.
Absolutely. Accountability of parents governing their children, accountability of healthcare providers, even with adult athletes. It's important for our collegiate athletes. I worked, if any of you seen the movie Major League, I had that team at one point in time. And we had a baseball coach, it was a small school. They weren't very good to start with. Coach left right before the season started, took the high caliber athletes with them. And we had 2 pitchers to get through a college baseball season. And by the end of the season, it was just get through. I'm like, Coach, he's at 100 pitches. We still have 5 innings. You got to put in the other one. Yeah, I know he hasn't had a day of rest, but you got to put in the other one. And our catcher over here, he can pitch the next set, or go get the outfielder and let him pitch the next set. Because I'm trying to be accountable to my athletes in that role as a healthcare provider when we're now removing parents from those decisions. And W's and dollars were not on our radar with my major league team, but it was a long season, and all I could do was jump for joy at the last game, and I felt really sorry for those young men. But so overuse is definitely a part of it. Disordered eating, weight loss, wrestling is sometimes challenging. We put rules in place, but do people follow them? Well, I have my initial weigh-in, but I've been losing weight for the previous 2 months, so that my weigh-in was down here instead of up here. Or do I wrestle up because there's somebody else in my class and I can't get on the mat, but if I wrestle up, so now we're into that maturity weight type lopsidedness. Concussion. This one is, I almost did this whole presentation on concussion, but I didn't want to talk about concussion for that long. This one has become a legal, political, ambulance chasing, IT tech nightmare. Because anybody who knows anything about IT is trying to create the next greatest device and make money off of it. And lawyers are trying to chase everybody who has put somebody back into sport before their concussion was cleared. And me, the athletic trainer, I'm just trying to make the best decision for my kid. And it's very challenging, but concussion, ironically, was the first hard ethics lesson I learned in my career. When I kept a kid out, he was our starting quarterback, I kept him out, we lost the game, and even in the game we would have won. You just know, because our kicker was actually playing quarterback, back to my same small school environment. And I was beating myself up over it, and my coach came out and he's like, what are you beating yourself up about? You made the right decision in the best interest of that kid. He goes, don't ever change that. That's why I like you as my provider. And I'm like, okay. And that lesson has stuck with me. And so we have that challenge of concussion now where everybody's hypersensitive to it. Because we're hypersensitive, we have kids trying to make ethical decisions about, I'm going to cover this up because I don't want to come off the field because I know I'm out today. And then I know I have to go to the doctor. And then I know I can't play until I'm symptom free. But the other challenge is concussion is a blind injury. I can see when a fracture is healed with some imaging, but there ain't nothing telling me that concussion's really healed. And we have kids coming all the time covering those types of things up. But other ethical challenges with some of these are, what if I'm at poor socioeconomic status high school? We have a high school here in town, kid gets a concussion, he's done for the season. His parents cannot afford to get him cleared, or it becomes a challenge for me as the healthcare provider to find a physician who will see them for free or low cost to give them the documentation that allows them to come back to sport. But at that particular high school, the majority of those athletes just are done. The season's over, I'm out. And they can't come back for any sport because they haven't been cleared by a physician. So they can't just leave football and come back for basketball season. They're just out. And so we have lots of particular challenges and decision-making processes that we have to go through with concussion. So any other conditions you can think of that we would need to really make challenges to the risk of them going back to sport?
With recovery of mononucleosis, skin is enlarged and they're told that they cannot participate for several weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I had a girl miss an entire season because her spleen would never retract after mono. It took her like 6 months to recover. So definitely there's those more acute conditions for sure. All right, so let's talk about those post-injury decisions. So Marty, being the other athletic trainer in the room, can probably sit here and go, oh yeah, I kind of get this. Every time we have somebody who's injured, we're having to make decisions based on what's going on with that particular injury. Can they go back today? Is this something I can put them right back on the field with a quick tip job or a quick something? Throw an IV bag on them and get them back in the game. Do they need to go back later in the game? Do they need to go back later in the week, later in the season? Or do they never need to go back? Or maybe they don't ever go back to the sport they're in, they go back to a different sport. I had a young gymnast who dismounted from the uneven bars, landed locked leg on both knees, dislocated both knees, bad injury, season ending, career ending in gymnastics. But she had such a good highlight when she came back. Her attitude was, well, I know I can't be a gymnast anymore and I'm okay with that. It's only 1 year of scholarship, I'm good, but what other sports can I do? And I'm like, this is a good kid I want to work with. I can help get this through and make some good decisions about getting her back to sport. But questions are, is it a long way from the heart? Those tend to be ones we think about going back today. You know, is it an ankle? Is it a finger? You know, those sometimes are easy decisions, but sometimes they're harder decisions. Sometimes it's an ankle, but is that really going to impact them long term if I let them back in? Okay. Is it the brain? You know, is it this concussion thing that we've been mentioning? Should they go back today? There's laws. The only injury that I know of that we deal with that has a law that tells me what I'm supposed to do with that athlete. They have to come out today. They can't go back if we suspect they have an injury. So in the state of Colorado, up through the age of 19, if it's suspected that they have a concussion, they have to come out. Well, in my sport that I work with the sport of professional rodeo. We see lots of injuries. I can't make any decision about their return to play. I can only give them best advice. They're a contract employee. They can make their own decision about whether they participate. I had a guy with a fractured neck who was actually in a halo who was trying to get on a bull. True story. He was a little off. To even think that he would want to get on a bull with a halo. Would not listen to the sports medicine staff, would not listen to our physician, would not listen to his buddies. So we went and got the stock contractor, who is the guy who brings the bulls to the rodeo, and says, you're not getting on my animal because you're not injuring my animal with that thing. And he was like, okay. So we worked a very big back door and kept him off of the bull. But, you know, is it life-threatening? Yes. Do I need to find a way out? Life-threatening tends to be the easiest decision to make. I'm going to do absolutely what I have to. Everybody, all those players, don't ever put up a fight for us. No, almost never. I was trying to board a kid who was unconscious, probably had a neck fracture, and his dad came in and said, get away from him. And I'm thinking, we need to get him to the hospital. And about that time, the kid came up swinging at me. And I was like, okay, I'm backing up. We're not going to board him right now because he's going to knock me out in the process. So he was okay. Just, you know, he did get seen, but he was just unconscious, no other injuries. But what's on the line? What point in the season are we in? How old is that athlete? Is this Peyton Manning in the last game of the Super Bowl at the end of his career? Or is this Johnny in the first game of his 8th grade year who has a long career ahead of him? So all those kinds of things come into the process of us making decisions about participation. So just want to get your input on this. So it's a little harder to see, but this is Susie. Susie is an amputee, above the knee amputee. She's 16-year-old. She is competing in the USA Paralympic trials, and she just sprained her right ankle. And at one point I typed left and realized I was reading the picture wrong. She sprained her right ankle, and she has one more event to go, which is the floor exercise. Should she compete? What do you think? You're the healthcare provider on the it's not a court, it becomes a floor in the gym, in the venue.
Well, so assuming it's more than one you can just walk off, you know, seriousness, I would say no, because you don't have, I mean, maybe it's the prosthetics, do you have that second ankle to support it, you know?
Well, I think part of that is what are the risks? What risks is she facing if she does compete? I don't know. I mean, I know a sprained ankle hurts, but beyond that.
What are the risks associated with the skills that she needs to accomplish and the power that she needs for that ankle to do that, right? And her routines.
So if this was your daughter, what would you say? Mom, Dad?
What does she want to do?
Yeah.
This is Paralympic trials, and if she toughs through it and makes the Olympic team, her future could be very, very bright. If we pull her off the mat when she feels like she can do it, and she doesn't make the team, her future could be very different.
Mhm. Are you guys feeling the pressure trying to make this call?
I think I'd ask that question, and then I would ask, what could be done right now to add stability around taking your intervention, and then weighing whether, what the grade of the sprain was, and would intervention change the potential risk?
Sure. So complex questions, right? Lots of information we have to have. If she were a wrestler on the mat, we have 30 seconds to make that decision based on wrestling rules. In gymnastics, we may have a long period of time to make that choice. We may not, depending upon how many people are competing in that potential meet that day. But all of those are valid questions to ask and come into play in making a patient-centered decision. If we're at the trials and this is a sprained right ankle, I'm probably gonna figure out a way to get that sucker locked down tight. Lots of tape, some moleskin, some other things. Margie, what would you do? You've probably been there.
Not with a Paralympic gymnast. I was never part of the program, but the same thing. But then I would run her through some of the skills that she expects that she needs to do in her routine to see if she can do them. And if she can't do her front double piped flip with her ankle taped and projecting off, then she's going to land on her head and break her neck. So we're going to have another discussion. And so basically, I would see what she can do and what she can't do. And sometimes in these situations, I've been forced to show people what they can't do, and then they're able to make the decision themselves instead of me making the decision for them.
Sometimes we set them up for testing failure, so they see what we see. And that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. So now let's think about this again. Okay, this is her twin sister, Sarah. Sarah's not competing for the Paralympic trials, but she's now competing for the final club competition. Sprain her ankle, has a floor event. Does that change the questions that you're asking?
Yeah.
Why? Just gotta get a quick yes right here.
I know, I was like, I don't have children, so it's hard to say, but I just feel like there's not that much on the line, it's not the Olympics, so let's make sure you're healthy enough to maybe get there someday.
Right. But could her performance in this determine whether she's invited to the trials?
Yeah.
Potentially, right? We don't know the bigger context.
Right.
But yeah, so twin sister is in the trials. Maybe she just missed it. Right, we don't know. So as you can see, as we're trying to make decisions sometimes on the spot, it becomes very challenging. It's different than being in a doctor's office where the pressure is less timely sometimes, but we also have physicians who work with these athletes who are trying to make these decisions in a timely manner as well. Just not necessarily right there on the floor. Like I said, in wrestling, we have some sports where we just have to make those decisions quickly, and just because of sporting rules. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to get Susie or Sarah to do? Are we trying to get her to that medal? Or are we trying to get her to being 60-something and throwing around some Olympic lifts? And that becomes the decision. Those are the options. Are you in it for today, or are you in it for the long haul? And I grew up, I was going to be the first female athletic trainer in the NFL. I was hell-bent on that. I love football. Grew up on the football field with my dad, that's what I was going to do. I got to grad school, had the opportunity to be around the NFL, was ready to apply for my internship, and then was around the NFL and said, Still love the sport, love the athletes, love being there, love doing those things, but the decisions of making for employees to participate in sport became challenging to my moral compass. Because I probably tend to lean here more than I lean here, but that's just who I am. know other athletic trainers who lean here more than they lean here. Like, let's go for it. Let's go for the W. Let's go for the dollar. And I'm more like, I really want to see you walk when you're 60. Get up and move around and throw around some weights. And so my moral compass kind of drove some decision making at that point in my career. And so we have to have our athletes figure out which one of these tracks they want to go down. And it's hard when you're dealing with a 16-year-old because that's all they can see. This is not so much important to them because they don't think they don't think being broken is going to happen to them. Yes?
I mean, it seems like what you're talking about there in part is a tension between sporting ethics that are about competition and winning and prestige and all those things, and medical ethics that are essentially about do no harm.
Yeah.
Right? And so I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but in your program, I mean, how do you address the tension between two different ethical systems that a person who is a sport physician is always up against?
Oh, they experience it constantly. And so we teach the ICF model, which is the International Classification of Function and Disease, which is supposed to take into consideration the whole person concept and not just the ankle injury, but what's the other context, the mental health, the other status, socioeconomic status comes in, social determinants of health all come into play with what we're talking about with our students. And there's a constant battle of telling them, what's ideal, what's not ideal, how do you make those choices? And then in their clinical rotations, they're already running into those decisions as soon as they hit their first location. But we talk to them about making those ethical decisions and how do they manage the players and how do they manage the athlete and working towards what's best for that person. But making sure that it's patient-centered so that the patient is also involved in deciding which one of those trajectories they want to go down. So it's a tough place to be being in that role rather than being the separate, I just showed up at my doctor's office. He doesn't really necessarily always know what's going on in the rest of that area. Our sports medicine physicians are much more aware of that than our many general practitioners. All right. So I want to touch on the healthcare model. This is a national controversy. Did any of you hear about the deaths that occurred at the University of Maryland? The death that occurred at the University of Maryland this past year. That kind of highlighted some of this, but this has been going on for a while. So when we talk about the healthcare model for athletics or physically active individuals, we're talking about the athletic department model, which is where the athletic training staff reports in the reporting structure to the athletic director, or in some cases to the coach, depending upon the structure of the organization. And then in the medical model, the athletic training staff reports to a medical provider. So athletic trainers as allied health professionals do work under the direction of a physician. So in this model of the athletic department, we see them reporting to somebody who is not a medical provider. What challenges do you think that might bring for somebody in that type of situation?
Like you said, it's going to be about the W's and money, probably before it's about the health of the athlete.
Definitely. We have bosses who don't necessarily understand the risk that injury poses, who may be pressuring the staff to make decisions that are more in line with the W or the dollar than for the healthcare and health and wellness of that athlete.
Along with that, then sometimes athletic trainers feel that their employment is threatened. So if I fight too hard against this, will I lose my job? And then what does that do, not only for me personally and financially, but where's my kind of threshold line of the risk for the student athlete and my what I'm supposed to be doing for them and me being able to at least be some sort of a buffer for them. So in some schools, the athletic trainer has been brought in by the coach, and the old athletic training staff is out, and the new athletic training staff is in, so the coach brought him in. And that's exactly that model she was talking about, it even reporting to a coach versus eventually the AD, but the coach too. And so there's this tug of war between my livelihood and doing what's right for the athlete, and it's a really hard line for some people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the NCAA has recommended the medical model for collegiate institutions, where athletic training moves out from under the athletic department organizational chart into a medical model. So some places that's reporting to student health, some places that's reporting to outside medical organizations. Boston University made this switch quite a while back and has had a very successful model, and has actually been the model many schools have followed in trying to move athletic trainers out from under the athletic department. This is such a hot topic that even just this past month, the president of the NATA was making a presentation to the Joint Commission on Sports Medicine Science about changing organizational charts, trying to make moving athletic trainers into that healthcare model as opposed to the athletic department model. And so you can see in this athletic department model, the head athletic trainer could be reporting to the same people that the marketing and promotion people are reporting to. And so at the end of the day, it is about that W and the dollar, and somebody who may or may not. Some athletic departments actually have former athletic trainers as athletic directors. In those cases, you're like, but that's rare. That's not the norm. And so we do see some problems with this type of reporting structure, and we're trying to see what that looks like. Another component that's happening across the country is as athletic training becomes more important and more high secondary schools are moving to try to have athletic trainers on staff, because of the low funding of education and the high cost of providing health care. I mean, sometimes we only even have a part-time school nurse and maybe a part-time counselor, in some cases a part-time superintendent. How are you going to hire an athletic trainer? Well, local hospitals or physical therapy organizations are hiring athletic trainers and doing outreach to those schools, using those as cost leaders. They're maybe losing money on it, but they know they're providing a service to those institutions. But in those models, because they're employees of this other organization, they're already in a medical model. They just didn't even know it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, they report back to their employer, and not necessarily the high school themselves. Now, the high schools, the principals, the coaches, the athletic directors, they're going to come and talk to you, but at the end of the day, they're still going to be employed if they make a decision that school's not super happy with. Now, the organization may then have to have some fighting going on with that school if they decide to drop their contract with them. But at the end of the day, that person's still going to have a job. So to wrap up, just a final component here, which is an interesting component coming off of our blizzard of 2 days. Participating because of weather threat. And it's really interesting being here in Colorado Springs because we see a lot of this weather. As an athletic trainer, our standard of care for determining if somebody has heat illness is to use a rectal thermometer to determine the core temperature of the athlete. Now, it's not a big deal. It's a long, little, thin tube, and it inserts into the rectum and has a continuous read thermometer on it. And it just tells us when their temperature is getting too high and is becoming life-threatening. We can leave that thermometer in the athlete as we're trying to cool them, making decisions about returning them to the hospital. Well, a lot of places around Colorado don't even have a rectal thermometer available because it's not that hot here. It's not humid and hot here. We're not the South, which that happens almost every day, right? If you've been in the South, you know this is a real thing. And every one of those people are prepared. But here in Colorado, people are like, it's not hot. Last summer, we had an athlete at the Warrior Games who had heat illness and was at 104 degrees, and they were doing everything they could to cool that individual. Granted, they had some predisposing conditions that led to that, but it happens. It doesn't have to be 100 plus degrees for somebody to get heat illness. It just has to be hot. And so people are making choices on a regular basis to not necessarily be prepared because they don't think. But we actually have policies that talk about this is what you should do to be prepared for this. We teach our athletes that. We also have cold policies. How many of you think your kid at your school, or know that your kid at your school has a cold conditions policy? When is it too cold to be outside playing? Just this past weekend, it was 24 degrees, and I was driving past one of the high schools, and there was a baseball game going on. And they were in sweatshirts, and they were rosy cheeks. And baseball, if any of you watch baseball, is not a short sport. It's a very long sport. And so what's that time of exposure? And then lightning. Colorado Springs is one of the top lightning areas. If you get, Woodland Park is actually #1. The Air Force Academy is #2 for lightning strike density in the state of Colorado. El Paso County, Colorado Springs is in the top 5 for lightning strike density in the state of Colorado. Yet there's a threat of lightning and people are out running down Santa Fe Trail. Making choices. How do we make choices for our athletes or about ourselves as we enter into these dangerous environments? And I'm almost as guilty. I have presented on lightning safety multiple times at the state, regional, and national level, and I finished with one of those presentations and I went to work the rodeo in Elizabeth, which has been hit by a tornado, which has had lightning strike the arena, and a major storm was rolling through, and they're still going on. There are no rules in professional rodeo to stop the event. Well, I was not out watching the event. I'm not going to stand and touch a metal fence to watch a cowboy who decides he's still going to get on an animal while there's lightning going on. So I was inside the trailer because I can't have just given a lightning safety talk and be the lightning girl. But they cleared the bleachers, but the Cowboys are still going at it. And so what are the ethical decisions wrapped up in that? And how do we make the right choices? So all of these conditions have recommendations for the appropriate thing to do. And they tell you that this is the point at which you need to move from the situation. One of our sports in the state of Colorado, the rules were the umpire of the softball games would call it in case of lightning. Well, that's a problem. What's an umpire supposed to be doing during a game? He should be watching the ball. He shouldn't be watching the sky. If he's watching the sky for lightning, he's going to miss the strike and create other problems. And so you should have a designated weather watcher, and that weather watcher should be undoubtedly able to make the call. If they can't, you have a problem in your reporting structure, and that's an ethical decision problem. And when do we go back to play? Well, when it cools off. Practice in the morning, practice late at night, wait till 30 minutes after your lightning is over, and if it's too cold, just go inside. Just make smart decisions and make the best decision for your athlete in those cases, because all of these are preventable conditions, and like I said earlier, we don't have that many, but all of these are preventable if we can just make the right choice about those kinds of decisions for participation. So that's it. Questions? Comments?
So back to the conversation about the medical model versus the other model. We heard a whole lot of pros. Do you, from your vantage point, do you see any cons to that model?
The cons are, the biggest con is, for me, that I see is now you have an arrangement for providing medical care to an organization. And so now you have a contract that people can decide, nope, I'm going to cut that contract because I'm not happy with your care, so I'm going to drop you. In some cases, people are paying to be that provider. And so now I'm paying to play. So there are some challenges with that. If I'm paying to be your provider, then I expect you to give back. But if you're not giving back, I can't force that issue because of anti-kickback laws. And so it becomes a slight tug of war. It's great, especially at a collegiate institution, when it's student health, because it's the same entity, you just have different reporting structures. So you're the same organization making the same decisions, or if the organization just splits. So the Denver Broncos, their athletic training staff, their sports medicine staff, report only to the owner of the Broncos. They have nothing to do with the coaching staff. And they're the only NFL team, to my knowledge, that have that structure, which is why the head athletic trainer or the director of sports medicine now has been there for 40 plus years. It's the only NFL team that's had an athletic trainer for that long. The rest are probably 5 or 10 years, most likely. So there definitely are, I'm glad you asked that. I kind of skipped over the cons. The cons with that medical model can be more of the political business side of the story, but as far as the reporting and being able to make good decisions, good medical decisions, it's definitely a pro. Yes, and then here.
I was just going to say, with the lighting issue, from what I've seen with our kids in high school and club, they're on top of it. I mean, somebody's got the app that tells what's within 5 miles or whatever. There's coordination with referees that, okay, we're called, and
Most all of our high schools are good with that. I would say there's an athletic trainer, you're probably following the rules to some degree. It's when we get outside of school sports where we don't necessarily have a healthcare provider on site or a strong organization following that, you start to see some changes. I've done research with coaches, and they don't know. Coaches have zero knowledge of lightning safety. That's a generalization. Probably 75% of coaches don't know the right thing to do in case of lightning.
It's usually our athletic director who's
Right.
looking at that, and then our kids played with Pride for a while, and they
Right.
had
Pride actually has a lightning detector out on the field.
they should. Where
It's right
East
there.
Kansas,
Yeah. So Pride's well taken care of as far as lightning goes.
One of the challenges, I think, with the lightning piece is that different organizations have different policies. So Babe Ruth Baseball may have a different policy of when you call it, how many miles out based upon whether it's the app or your flash to bang count versus what youth soccer might have versus what
CHASA.
A cycling program might have, or CHASA. Yeah, so it's unfortunate that it's not just standardized. They're all pretty close, but it's not just standardized, so everybody can just be on the same page.
CHASA has zeroed in on their lightning safety since a presentation I gave that the medical director was attending, and they have tried to make it across the board for their sports. They didn't realize that they had different rules for different sports within CHASA rules, so they kind of tried to back that off and make it umbrella for all of the sports, that this is what we're going to follow using the newer regulations.
For a high school
For the high
association,
schools,
but
yeah.
then
But not youth
your
sport.
AAU team maybe has something different.
Right, absolutely.
I guess the thing I was going to bring up is kind of the same thing, not lightning but cold. I coach youth flag football, and I took a team up to Denver last November for a tournament. I think it was an NFL flag tournament, state tournament, and so that weekend was basically a blizzard. And so 2 nights before, we're doing the coaches conference call, and we're asking, okay, will this be canceled? And the directors say, unless there's lightning, we won't cancel. And most of the coaches are dads with very, very little, we have like no training whatsoever. And then the next thing you know,
It's publicly available, just so you know.
right, but you have to seek it out,
Right.
And most of the dads don't seek it out, which is part of an issue here. And so then you get all the, and so then I realized, okay, these guys are drawing on ethical systems that are not medical based, they're not sport based, they're just about masculinity. And they're like, yeah, I remember in high school, it was so cold, the helmet stuck to my head, my parents had to get a hairdryer to get it off. It's good for the kids, right? This builds character. It was in the 20s. It was a 2-day tournament. Sunday was okay. Saturday, it was in the 20s. It was snowing, and with the wind chill, it was in the teens. And we played 3 games that day. I mean, how do you stay warm? How do the kids' hands, like, between every game, we'd go into the car, turn on the engine, turn on the heater, put the kids' hands over the vents, and I swear to God, every kid, they're all teenagers, were all crying in their cars as their hands were defrosting. Between each, I mean, it was ridiculous. Yeah, we won the tournament, but, which is nice, but we don't, winning was important to us, but it's more about pleasure. And that was not fun. There was no fun,
I've been
especially
there,
on
I've done
Saturday.
that. We're scraping the football field line, coach's kids melting his shoes on the space heater on the side of the field, So it happens, but the more you know, isn't that what they say on Saturday mornings? The more you know, the better you are at making decisions. And so hopefully that's what you got some of today, and I just want to thank you for your time.
I'm sure we'll talk more.